Maya Caldwell tightened the straps on her rucksack with both hands, and Sergeant Major Derek Holloway's voice cut through the cold morning air like a blade. "Someone carry her pack." He didn't shout it, he didn't have to. Every soldier on that line heard it, a few smiled. Most looked away. Nobody moved to defend her because in that moment, every single one of them believed he was right. They had no idea she was about to carry all of them. If this story already has you leaning forward, stay with us. Subscribe to the channel, follow every part until the end, and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. We want to see how far this story travels. The floodlights at Camp Redstone came on at 415. Not sunrise, not dawn, not even the gray half-light that sometimes softened the edge of a hard morning. Just raw, white industrial light flooding the staging area like an interrogation room, turning every face pale and every shadow sharp. 41 soldiers stood in formation. They ranged from 19-year-old privates who had never seen combat to career NCOs who had spent decades learning how to hate their own bodies just enough to keep moving. Some were broad, some were lean, some had the particular kind of stillness that came from having been scared badly enough, often enough, that fear had stopped feeling like a warning and started feeling like weather. Just something you moved through. Lieutenant Maya Caldwell stood third from the left in the second row. She was 5 feet 6 inches, 138 pounds. Her rucksack was standard issue 45 pounds loaded, and she had secured every strap with the kind of deliberate precision that came not from habit but from ritual. Left shoulder first, right shoulder second, sternum strap clipped and centered. Hip belt cinched to take weight off her spine, 2 fingers slid under each strap to check for bunching. She had packed that rucksack the night before, alone, in the barracks at 2,200 hours, checking the contents 3 times by headlamp. Medical kit, standardized. Navigation tools, standardized. Emergency rations, standardized. And one item that wasn't on any official packing list, a small green notebook, palm-sized, with a rubber band around it and a pen clipped to the spine. The notebook had no unit markings, no dates, no official purpose. Just names. Dozens of them. Written in Maya's handwriting, some neat, some rushed, some pressed so hard into the paper that you could feel the impressions on the back of every page. She zipped the rucksack closed, stood up, shouldered it in one clean motion, and walked out into the cold. Sergeant Major Derek Holloway arrived at 425 and walked the line like a man inspecting property he expected to find damaged. He was 52 years old and built like the Army had poured him from a mold it no longer manufactured. 6 feet 1, 220 pounds of muscle and hard living, with a face that had been weathered past the point of being called rugged, and into something more specific, the particular look of a man who had pushed past his own limits so many times that he no longer recognized normal discomfort as discomfort. His record was real: 3 combat deployments, Ranger qualified. Air assault, mountain warfare certified, 2 Bronze Stars, 1 with Valor. A Purple Heart he never mentioned. 12 years as a senior NCO training soldiers who would never be as strong as he was, and who he had largely stopped believing in after a certain age, after a certain number of disappointments. He walked slowly, he evaluated. He stopped in front of each soldier long enough to look them in the eye, check their gear, and form a judgment he usually kept to himself because Holloway had learned, over decades, that silence was often more devastating than criticism. Then he reached Maya. He stopped. He looked at her rucksack. He looked at her frame. He looked at the way she was standing, shoulders back, weight distributed correctly, posture that showed she knew how to load a heavy pack. And none of it mattered, because Sergeant Major Derek Holloway had already read her file. He had read it 3 nights ago, in his quarters, under bad light, with a cup of coffee that had gone cold before he was halfway through. Lieutenant Maya Caldwell, 29 years old, combat medic, cross-trained as a tactical officer. Prior enlisted, commissioned after 3 years as a special operations medic. Decorated, multiple deployments, performance evaluations ranging from exceptional to outstanding for the first 5 years of her career. Then 1 mission, 1 night, 1 report. The report was 11 pages long and concluded with a finding that had effectively ended Maya Caldwell's career trajectory in 1 sentence. Responsible party failed to execute extraction protocol under conditions permissible for successful completion. She had been cleared of misconduct. The investigation had stopped short of a formal reprimand. But the finding sat in her file like a stone in a shoe, not enough to force her out, but enough to stop every promotion per board from looking at her the way they looked at officers who had never been touched by something like that. 3 years had passed. She was still a lieutenant. Holloway had looked at her file and decided he already knew everything he needed to know. So when he reached her in the line and looked at her rucksack and looked at her frame, he said it. Quiet, conversational, almost gentle in the way that certain cruelties are. Someone carry her pack. He had already turned away before the sentence finished landing. He didn't see her expression. He didn't see the way her jaw set. He didn't see the controlled breath she drew in through her nose and released slowly through her mouth, a technique she had developed years ago for moments exactly like this one. He also didn't see the way the soldier standing next to her, a 19-year-old private named Torres, flinched and looked sideways at Maya, with something that was half apology and half confusion. Torres had been in the army for 7 months. In those 7 months, nobody had ever told him that you could dismiss someone that thoroughly, that publicly, with that few words. He was learning. Captain James Reeder, the event coordinator, heard the comment from 20 feet away and chose not to respond. Reeder was 35 and politically careful in the way that officers became when they understood that their own career advancement depended on not creating friction with senior NCOs who outranked them in influence if not in grade. He made a note on his clipboard. He told himself it wasn't his place. He told himself a lot of things that morning. Maya watched him make the note and look away, and she understood the calculus, immediately the same calculus she had watched play out in every unit she had served in since the report. Nobody was going to defend her. Not because they all believed Holloway was right, but because the cost of being wrong on her behalf was one nobody wanted to pay. She had stopped expecting anyone to pay it. She simply tightened her hip belt one more time. And then the starting signal fired. The Iron Valley Challenge was not a race. That was the first thing the briefing document said, and the first thing most soldiers ignored. It was a 22-mile combat endurance ruck, meaning you carried a loaded rucksack over mixed terrain under time constraints, but your score was not based on your finish time. It was based on your finish, period. Every soldier who crossed the finish line with their rucksack intact and their weight that verified was recorded as a completion. Every soldier who dropped out was recorded as a failure. Simple, brutal in its simplicity, the terrain was not simple. The first 5 miles tracked northeast through a shallow desert basin where the ground was packed hardpan that punished ankles with every uneven step. The next 4 miles climbed through gravel switchbacks that destroyed your rhythm and your knees simultaneously. Miles 9 through 14 crossed open flats where the temperature climbed and there was no shade and the wind when it came felt like mockery. The final 8 miles were a mixed descent and flat finish that soldiers usually hit either with their second wind or their last reserves, and there was no way of knowing which you would have until you were already in it. 41 soldiers started the course. Historically, Iron Valley averaged a 22% dropout rate. Holloway had looked at Maya Caldwell and privately put her odds of finishing at somewhere around 40%. He had been generous. The first mile passed without incident. The second mile was when Torres started to fade. Maya noticed it before Torres did. She had been watching the soldiers around her, with the same peripheral awareness she had developed, as a combat medic, the kind of looking that didn't look like looking, that registered information from the edges of your vision, without drawing attention to the fact that you were taking it in. Torres's stride had shortened. His head had dropped 2 inches below its normal position. His left shoulder was rolling forward with each step, which meant his pack was shifting off-center, which meant his spine was compensating, which meant that within the next mile or two his lower back would start screaming and then go quiet in the particular way that preceded real injury. She had seen it 100 times. She fell back half a step until she was level with him. Torres, he looked sideways without slowing. "Ma'am? Your pack is sliding right. Pull your left strap an inch." He looked uncertain. "I adjusted it this morning." "You adjusted it when your shoulders were fresh," she said. "They're not fresh anymore. Pull the strap." He reached up without breaking stride and pulled. The shift was immediately visible. The pack settled. His shoulder leveled. His head came back up. "How'd you know?" he said. "Your left arm was swinging longer than your right. Your body was trying to rebalance without telling you." Torres absorbed this. They walked in silence for a quarter mile. "Ma'am," he said, "can I ask you something? Go ahead. Why are you helping me? You could be pulling ahead right now." Maya didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was even. "Because in 6 months you might be the guy next to me when something goes wrong," she said. "And I need you to know how to take care of yourself." Torres didn't say anything after that. He just walked, and he started watching his own form. By mile 4, Maya had quietly corrected 3 other soldiers. A staff sergeant named Bivens who was gripping his straps too tightly, causing his hands to lose circulation. She told him to drop his arms and shake out his fingers every quarter mile. He told her to mind her own business. She nodded and kept walking. Half a mile later, Bivens shook out his fingers. He didn't acknowledge it. She didn't require him to. A specialist named Okonkwo, who had developed a slight limp from a hot spot on his right heel, She told him to stop for 60 seconds, apply moleskin from her medical kit, and relace his boot with the runner's knot to reduce movement at the toe box. Okonkwo looked at her the way soldiers looked at lieutenants who hadn't been in long enough to have credibility, with polite skepticism barely concealing impatience. She waited, he stopped, she fixed his boot, he ran a hand over the repair and looked at her differently after that. And a sergeant first class named Dempsey, who was hyperventilating slightly, taking short, shallow breaths that were going to acidify his muscles within the next 4 miles. She fell in beside him for 3 minutes and breathed deliberately, long, controlled, through the nose until Dempsey matched her rhythm without being asked. Nobody was watching any of this, or so she thought. Captain Reeder had been watching. He was positioned at the mile 4 checkpoint with a radio and a logbook, recording split times and conducting gear checks, and he had a direct line of sight to the stretch of trail where Maya had been working. He logged her split time. He noted what she was doing. He said nothing. He called the mile 8 checkpoint on the radio and told them to pay attention to the lieutenant in the second cohort. He didn't say why. He went back to his logbook. At mile 5, the first real crisis of the day occurred. A young officer named Hendricks, 23 years old, ROTC commissioned, 4 months into his first assignment, stepped on loose gravel on a downhill approach, rolled his ankle at full weight, and went down hard. He hit the ground with his full pack on top of him, and for 3 seconds he lay completely still, in the way that people go still when their nervous system is deciding whether the pain is survivable. Then he made a sound, worse than a scream. The involuntary high-pitched exhale of someone who has been hurt badly and is trying not to show it and failing completely. The soldiers nearest him slowed. Most of them didn't stop. The course rules were clear. Injury evacuation was the responsibility of the medical team stationed at each checkpoint. Soldiers were not required to stop for injured participants. Stopping cost score. Score cost promotions. Most of them kept moving. Maya was at the back of the group when Hendricks went down. She reached him in 15 seconds. She dropped to one knee beside him, put 2 fingers on his wrist, looked at his ankle, and said, "Tell me where it hurts and be specific." Hendricks was trying to sit up. "I'm fine. Tell me where it hurts." "Outside of my right ankle." He moved his foot, and the sharp intake of breath told her everything. "It's bad, lateral malleolus. Possible grade sprain." She was already pulling from her kit. "Can you feel your toes?" "Yes." "Wiggle them for me." He wiggled them. "Good, no nerve involvement. I'm going to compress and tape this. You're going to walk to the checkpoint and get it looked at by the medical team." Hendricks looked at the trail ahead. "I can finish." Maya looked at him. "Just looked at him, Lieutenant," he said. "I need to finish." "I know you do," she said. "Tell me why." He was quiet for a second. "My dad was a combat veteran. He did this course 20 years ago. He told me if I ever had the chance to walk the same ground, I should." Maya finished taping his ankle. She stood up. "Then we compress it. You walk to the checkpoint. You get it re-evaluated. And if the medical team clears you, you finish. But you don't blow out your ankle on mile 5 and limp through 17 more miles on pride alone. That's not what he taught you." Hendricks stared at her. "How do you know what he taught me?" "Because a man who told his kid to walk the same ground he walked didn't raise a kid who throws himself away on bad decisions," she said. "He raised someone who knows the difference between pushing hard and being stupid." A long pause. "Then Hendricks, ma'am." She helped him up. She walked him to the checkpoint herself, which cost her 11 minutes. She didn't mention the 11 minutes. When she reached the checkpoint and handed Hendricks to the medical team, the checkpoint medic, a young sergeant named Fuentes, looked at the tape job on Hendricks's ankle and said, "Who did this?" "She did," Hendricks said, nodding at Maya. Fuentes looked at the tape job for another moment. "That's better than what I would have done," he said. Maya nodded once and walked back onto the course. The talk started at mile 6. It moved through the formation the way information always moved in military units, in fragments, slightly distorted, carried by people who had heard part of something and filled in the rest with what they already believed. What it started as, that female lieutenant stopped to help the guy who went down. What it became by mile 7, she spent 20 minutes with the injured soldier and then kept going. What it became by the time it reached Sergeant Major Holloway's position at mile 8, the lieutenant has been stopping to help multiple soldiers throughout the course. Holloway received this information from his aide, Specialist Marcus Webb, who delivered it with the careful neutrality of a young soldier who has learned that his job is to report facts and not interpretations. Holloway's expression didn't change. "She's burning herself out," he said. Webb said nothing. "By mile 12 she'll be running on empty," Holloway continued. "That's what happens when you spend your resources on other people's problems. You have nothing left for your own." Webb nodded. He had been in the Army long enough to know that sometimes senior NCOs were right. He had also been in long enough to know that sometimes they were just telling a story they'd already decided to believe. He kept both things to himself. The inspection happened at mile 11. It wasn't scheduled. Holloway radioed ahead to the checkpoint and ordered it specifically for Maya's gear. He told himself it was a random audit. He told himself it was standard protocol. He told himself a lot of things that morning. The checkpoint team pulled Maya aside as she arrived. "We need to conduct a gear verification, ma'am," the checkpoint NCO said. Maya stopped without protest. She unslung her rucksack and set it on the inspection table and stepped back with her hands at her sides. The checkpoint NCO opened it, and then there was silence. Not the silence of finding something incriminating. The silence of not finding what he expected to find. He went through it methodically. Medical kit complete, contents verified against the required loadout. Navigation tools complete, emergency rations complete. Water 2 liters as required, emergency signaling device present. Everything on the required list was there. Everything not on the required list was not there. Except for one thing, the green notebook. The NCO pulled it out and looked at it. He turned it over. He looked at Maya. "This isn't on the required loadout." "No, sir. Can I ask what it is?" A pause, she said. He looked at it again. "Soldiers you've served with?" "Some of them," she said. "Others are soldiers I've read about. Soldiers I felt needed to be remembered by someone who knew why they mattered." The NCO held the notebook for a moment longer than he needed to. Then he put it back in the rucksack. "Everything's good," he said to Holloway over the radio. The silence on the other end of the radio lasted 4 seconds. "Copy," Holloway said. He put his radio down. He stood at his position at mile 12 and looked at the trail ahead and thought about a lieutenant he had dismissed, whose rucksack was carrying exactly what it was supposed to carry and something else besides, something he didn't have a category for. He thought about the notebook. He thought about names. He thought about why a soldier would carry names into a ruck. And for the first time since he had looked at Maya Caldwell's file 3 nights ago, Sergeant Major Derek Holloway was not certain he had been right. The section of trail between miles 9 and 12 was called the Flats, and it had broken more soldiers than any other part of the course. It had nothing to recommend it, no shade, no landmarks, no variation in the terrain that might trick your brain into thinking you were making progress. Just open, flat, sun-blasted ground that seemed to extend forever in every direction, and the psychological weight of knowing that the gravel switchbacks were behind you and the descent was still miles ahead, and right now, here in the middle of nothing, you were just walking. Just carrying, just deciding every step to take one more step. This was where people quit, not because they physically couldn't continue. Most of the people who dropped on the flats could have kept moving if they had chosen to. They quit because the flats stripped away every distraction and every excuse, and left you with the fundamental question that every long ruck eventually asked: "Why are you doing this?" And if your answer wasn't strong enough, you sat down. Maya knew this about the flats. She had read the course history. More than that, she knew it from experience from 3 previous long rucks, 2 of them combat-loaded. One of them conducted under fire on a mountain in conditions so bad that the mountain itself seemed to be trying to kill everyone who was still moving. She knew what it felt like to ask yourself that question and find that your answer was still there. She also knew that a lot of the soldiers around her were about to ask it for the first time. So she started talking, not loudly, not a speech, not the kind of motivational performance that soldiers rolled their eyes at. Just conversation, the kind that a good soldier made when the person next to them was about to go somewhere dark and they needed a line back. She talked to Torres about his family. He had 3 younger sisters. 2 of them had just started college. He sent money home every month. His mother worked 2 jobs and had worked 2 jobs his entire life, and he had decided to enlist because he wanted to give her one less thing to worry about. She talked to Okonkwo about why he had joined. He had grown up watching American military documentaries with his father in Lagos. When his family immigrated, he had walked into a recruiter's office the same week he got his citizenship. Talked to a sergeant named Paulson, who had been silent and miserable for the last 3 miles, and who finally said, unprompted, "I don't know if I can do this." And Maya said, "Yes, you can. Tell me something about someone you love." And Paulson looked at her like she was slightly insane, and then said, "My daughter plays piano." And Maya said, "Tell me about her." And Paulson talked about his daughter for 1.5 miles and never noticed that he was no longer thinking about whether he could finish. Nobody quit on the flats, not from Maya's cohort, not that day. Later, when people tried to explain it, they said things like good morale and unit cohesion and competitive atmosphere. Torres knew it was something else. He kept it to himself. At mile 12, Maya reached the water station and refilled her canteen. She drank 16 ounces immediately, Not because she was thirsty, but because she knew she was at the point in the ruck where thirst stopped being a reliable signal. Your body at this distance was already running a hydration deficit. Thirst meant you were behind. You drank before you felt it or you paid for it later. She was refilling the second canteen when she heard the conversation. Two junior officers standing 8 feet away, refilling their own water, not bothering to lower their voices because they didn't think anyone worth worrying about was listening. She's been back and forth helping everyone for 12 miles, the first one said. His name was Lieutenant Barker. She had heard his name but not met him before today. She's running on fumes, does it matter? The second one said. That was Lieutenant Gregg. She's still here, she won't be for long, Barker said. She never should have been here in the first place. You read her file? I've heard about it. The mission on Mount Airy 3 years ago. Ryan Mercer, she was the medic on extraction. The whole thing went sideways and the report said she made calls that cost time. Cost distance, cost Mercer his life. Maya's hands had gone very still on her canteen. I thought that was inconclusive, Gregg said. Inconclusive enough to keep her in uniform, Barker said. Not inconclusive enough to explain why a decorated combat medic suddenly has a career that looks like a flatline. There's always something to those stories. What do you think really happened? I think she panicked. I think she froze. I think she was exactly the thing everyone was afraid she would be. And the investigation was kind because nobody wanted to write the paperwork it would take to be unkind. Gregg said nothing. Maya capped her canteen. She walked past them without looking at them. And she reached the trail and looked at the name attached to her rucksack, the name that had been assigned randomly at the start of the event, printed on a small white strip of cloth and secured to the left shoulder strap. Staffed at Ryan Mercer, she touched it with 2 fingers, the way you touched something you were afraid of, or something you were carrying. She took her hands away, she put one foot on the trail, and then the other, and then the other. She was still moving. At mile 13, Sergeant Major Derek Holloway came up behind her on the trail. He had moved from the mile 12 checkpoint and was walking the course himself, monitoring, evaluating, doing the thing that good senior NCOs did, which was see the course the way their soldiers saw it, instead of seeing it from a table with a radio. He fell in 6 paces behind her. He didn't announce himself. He watched her walk. She had been carrying 45 pounds for 13 miles. Her stride was shorter than it had been at mile 1, but it was still even. Her shoulders were still level. Her breathing was controlled, not easy. Nothing was easy at mile 13, but controlled, which was different. He walked behind her for a quarter mile. She didn't know he was there, or she gave no sign of knowing. Then she spoke. You can ask me directly, Sergeant Major, she said. She hadn't turned around. He came up beside her. Ask you what? He said. Whatever it is you're trying to decide about me, she said. I've been watched since mile 8. That inspection wasn't random. He didn't read your file, he said. I know. The Mount Airy report. I know what's in it. Then you know why I said what I said at 430. I know why you said it, she said. That doesn't mean you were right. He walked beside her for a while. Tell me your version, he said. She was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was level. Mount Airy was a mountain extraction under fire, she said. Staff Sergeant Ryan Mercer was hit on the approach. He was ambulatory conscious, talking, moving. The decision to extract on foot was made because the terrain made helicopter approach impossible. I was the team medic. I carried him. The report said you took a longer route. I took the only route where we didn't get shot, she said. The direct route had an active fire position at the junction. Taking it would have killed him, and probably me and possibly 2 other members of the team. The report said the longer route added critical time. It added 40 minutes, she said. He survived the 40 minutes. He survived the entire extraction. He was alive when we reached the casualty collection point. Holloway was quiet. He died of cardiac arrest 6 hours later in surgery, Maya said, which the autopsy report attributed to a pre-existing cardiac condition exacerbated by blood loss and the physical stress of the extraction. That wasn't in the report I read. No, she said. It wasn't. She said nothing for a moment. Because the report was written by someone who needed to explain why the mission outcome was negative, she said. And it was easier to explain it as a medic's error than to explain it as a soldier who had a cardiac condition that had been missed on 3 consecutive physicals. Holloway stopped walking. Maya kept moving. She didn't look back. He stood there for a moment, watching her walk away from him, carrying her 45 pounds, carrying the name on her rucksack, carrying everything she had been carrying for 3 years. Then he started walking again. He didn't try to catch up. He had heard what he needed to hear, and he was beginning to understand that the story he had believed for 3 days had been missing most of its chapters. By the time Maya reached the end of the flats at mile 14, something had shifted in the formation. It was subtle. It wasn't organized. Nobody had planned it. But the soldiers who had been around her, Torres, Okonkwo, Paulson, Bivens, Dempsey, had quietly redistributed themselves in the formation so that they were near her. Not in front, not behind, beside. It was the kind of thing that happened without a command, without discussion, without anyone admitting it was happening. The instinct of people who had been helped by someone to move themselves into a position where they could help in return, even if no help was needed, even if help would never be required. Just to be there, just to be close enough that if something happened they could answer. Torres noticed it at mile 14 and felt something he didn't quite have words for, yet something he would describe later to his sisters, as the moment I understood what a real soldier was. For now he just kept walking beside Maya Caldwell, into mile 15 to whatever came next. The trail rose again at mile 14.5, climbing toward a rocky ridge that marked the final transition before the descent. And that was when Sergeant Major Derek Holloway, 52 years old, 3 combat deployments, 2 Bronze Stars, 1 Purple Heart, the strongest man most people in the unit had ever seen, felt his legs go wrong. It started as a wobble, just a slight uncharacteristic loss of balance on a step that should have been stable. He corrected. He kept walking, then his vision narrowed at the edges. He blinked. He drank from his canteen. He told himself it was the altitude. Then his heart did something unusual. Not pain, not quite. More like a misfiring, a single beat out of sequence, a small electrical error somewhere in the machinery of his chest. He stopped walking. He stood very still. And then slowly, with the careful dignity of a man who had never fallen in front of troops and was not going to start now, Sergeant Major Derek Holloway folded onto one knee, and then onto both knees. And then the ground came up and he was lying on it, his rucksack wedged awkwardly behind him, the sky tilting, the trail spinning gently, and somewhere behind him he could hear voices starting to rise. His last clear thought, before the edges of consciousness began to soften, was a single, sharp, humiliating recognition. She was right, nobody finishes alone. Then the voices got louder, and the first one he heard clearly was hers. Maya had been 15 paces ahead when she heard the sound. Not a shout, not a call for help, just the specific, unremarkable sound of a body hitting the ground, the flat, dull impact that she had learned, in years of combat medicine, to hear the way other people heard a name being called. She turned before she thought about turning. She was moving before she had processed what she had seen. She reached him in 8 seconds, Sergeant Major. He didn't answer. She dropped to her knees, 2 fingers to his neck, other hand on his chest. Pulse present, weak irregular, breathing shallow labored. Skin hot dry. She made the assessment in 4 seconds and knew exactly what she was dealing with. She turned to the soldiers who had stopped around them. Torres, radio the next checkpoint now. Tell them we have heat-related emergency. Possible cardiac arrhythmia. Request emergency medical response. Give your grid. Move. Torres was already pulling his radio. Okonkwo his gear. Now get the pack off him. Okonkwo moved. Anything. Use your body if you have to. Bivens stepped over Holloway and blocked the sun with his own body. Dempsey, give me your water. Dempsey handed her his canteen. She worked with the unhurried efficiency of someone who has done this before, under worse conditions, cooling his skin, monitoring his pulse, maintaining his airway, talking to him in a low, steady voice. Sergeant Major, stay with me. Help is coming. I need you to breathe slowly. Match my pace. Out 2-3. Holloway's eyes had opened. He was looking at her. His face held something she had never seen on it before. Not strength, not command, something more like bewilderment, the expression of a man encountering something that doesn't fit the map he built. He started. Don't talk, she said. You knew. I said don't talk. Sergeant Major, her voice was firm without being harsh. The voice of someone who had moved beyond argument into function. I need you to be quiet and breathe. You can ask questions when you're not lying on a trail with an irregular heartbeat. Right now my job is to keep you here. Do your job and let me do mine. He went quiet. He breathed. In the distance, Paulson could already hear the sound of the medical team moving up the trail. Torres's radio call had been fast, accurate, complete. 7 minutes. In 7 minutes, Holloway was conscious and cooling and stable. In 9 minutes, the medical team had him secured and was beginning assessment. In 10 minutes, he was sitting up, looking at her, and understanding, with the full weight of 52 years and 30 years of service, that he had spent the first 4 hours of this day being catastrophically, completely wrong. He had a lot to carry, and he was not the one who had been carrying it. The medical team took 11 minutes to fully stabilize Holloway. 11 minutes during which Maya never left his side, never stopped monitoring, never let her voice lose its steadiness even when his pulse spiked and then dropped and then found itself again like a man grabbing a ledge in the dark. When the team leader, a captain named Briggs, finally took over and told her he had it, she stood up slowly, rolled her shoulders back, and looked down at Holloway the way you looked at someone you had pulled back from somewhere they weren't supposed to go yet. He was sitting up, color returning, eyes clear. He looked at her and said nothing. She nodded once and turned back toward the trail, Lieutenant. His voice was rough, still weak at the edges, but it was his voice again, the command voice, the one that had told her at 430 that she needed someone to carry her pack. She stopped. She didn't turn around. "I owe you an explanation," he said. "You owe me a finish line," she said. "That's all." She walked. Torres fell in beside her at the pace she set, which was faster than it had been before Holloway went down, not reckless, but deliberate, the pace of someone who has decided that stopping costs more than it saves. Okonkwo picked it up on her left. Paulson, Bivens, Dempsey, all of them settling back into motion around her, the formation rebuilding itself without a command, without discussion, just the organic pull of people who had decided without saying so that wherever she was going they were going too. Behind them, Captain Reeder stood at the emergency position with his radio and his clipboard, and he watched the group move away and then looked down at his notes and then looked up again and wrote something that was not a split time. He wrote a name. He underlined it twice. Mile 15 came on hard. The trail after the ridge descent was technically easier, the grade was forgiving, the footing more predictable, but mile 15 was the cruelest mile on the course for reasons that had nothing to do with terrain. It was the mile where your body had already spent everything it planned to spend, and the finish was still 7 miles away, and the math of that gap was the thing that broke you. Not the hills, not the heat, the distance, the flat indifferent arithmetic of how far you had come versus how far you still had to go. Maya knew this mile. She had studied it on paper and felt it in her legs simultaneously, which was the strange double consciousness of someone who had prepared so thoroughly that experience confirmed prediction in real time. She also knew that the soldiers around her were hitting it differently than she was, because she had been carrying this course in her head for weeks, and most of them had just been carrying it in their legs since 430. Torres was the one who said it first, "Ma'am." His voice was controlled but tight. The voice of someone working to keep something down. "I'm starting to do the math." "Don't," she said immediately. 7 miles feels. "Don't do the math." He was quiet for half a stride. "What do I do instead?" "Pick something," she said. "Pick one thing that's real and hold on to it. Your something your mother said, a reason, not a finish line, a reason." He thought about it. "My youngest sister starts nursing school in September," he said. "She called me the night before I left for this and said she was scared." "What did you tell her?" "I told her to walk in anyway." Maya didn't respond immediately. When she did, her voice was quiet enough that only Torres heard it. "Then walk in anyway." He straightened. His stride lengthened. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. At mile 15.4, Lieutenant Barker appeared on Maya's right side. He was one of the 2 officers she had overheard at the water station, the one who had said she probably panicked, probably froze, that the investigation had been kind because no one wanted to write the paperwork it took to be unkind. He looked like he had been working up to this for the past mile. "Caldwell," he said. She didn't look at him. "Barker. What you did back there with Holloway." He stopped. "Recalibrated. That was solid work. Thank you. I mean it." Most people would have frozen. She said nothing. He walked beside her for a moment in the uncomfortable silence of someone who has said the thing they thought would land and discovered it hadn't landed the way they imagined. "I heard what you told him," Barker said finally, "at mile 13. When he walked with you." She looked at him then, a single brief measuring look. "We were alone," she said. "I was 50 yards back on the trail. Sound carries out here." She faced forward again. "Then you heard what I said," she said. "I don't have anything to add. The Mount Airy extraction." "Barker," he stopped. "I'm not going to explain Ryan Mercer to you on mile 15 of a ruck," she said. "Not here. Not like this." "I said something I shouldn't have said," Barker said. "At the water station." "I know what you said. I didn't know you were standing there." "I know that too." "Does it matter?" he asked. "Whether you heard it or not." Maya was quiet for 3 full strides. "It matters to me that you believe it," she said. "Not because it hurts. Because you're going to make decisions about soldiers based on what you believe. And if what you believe is wrong, those decisions will be wrong, and eventually someone will pay for that." Barker said nothing. He walked. After a while, he said, "I'm sorry." She nodded once. Neither of them said anything more. But Barker, for the rest of the course, never again moved to the front of the group. He stayed in the middle, close enough to hear, close enough to help. He didn't know yet what he was making up for, but he knew he was making up for something. Mile 16 arrived with a wind that came out of nowhere and hit the formation sideways, not cooling, just disorienting. The kind of wind that pushed against you at exactly the wrong angle and made every step feel like a small argument you were losing. Sergeant First Class Dempsey was the one who started slipping. Not his footing, his composure. He had been solid through the flats. Solid through the ridge. But mile 16 found something in him that the terrain hadn't, and Maya felt it before she saw it, the way his breathing pattern changed, the way his footfalls became less deliberate, the half-second hesitations that accumulated into something that looked, from the outside, like a man losing a conversation with himself. She moved beside him without ceremony. "What's happening, Dempsey?" "Nothing. Flat automatic. Your breathing pattern changed 3 minutes ago." He shot her a look. "You're tracking my breathing?" "I'm tracking everyone's breathing," she said. "That's what I do." He looked away. "I'm fine, you're not fine," she said. Not accusatory. "Just something hit you at mile 16. Talk to me or it's going to get worse." For a moment she thought he was going to shut her out completely. She had seen it enough times. The male soldier's particular retreat into pride that sometimes cost more than whatever they were protecting. Then Dempsey said, "My son is 17. She waited. "He wants to enlist," Dempsey said. "I've been trying to talk him out of it. Not because I don't believe in the service, because I do. Because I've seen what it costs, and I don't know if he stopped." "If what? If he's built for what it cost," Dempsey said. "He's soft, he's a good kid, he's smart as hell, he's got a future that doesn't require him to carry 45 pounds through a desert to prove something. And I keep thinking about that, about whether I've been telling him the right things." Maya walked with that for a moment. "What does he say when you try to talk him out of it?" Dempsey's jaw worked. "He says I made it look worth it." The sentence sat between them like something that needed to be handled carefully. "Then you did something right," Maya said quietly. "Whatever it cost you, whatever it cost your family. He looked at your life and decided it was worth something. That's not a failure, Dempsey. That's the whole point." He was quiet for a long time. "That doesn't make it less scary," he said. "No," she agreed, "it doesn't." They walked. "You have kids?" he asked. "No." "Then how do you—" "I've watched people carry crosses long enough to know what the good ones look like from the outside," she said. "The ones who are terrified because they love something enough to be terrified." "That's you." Dempsey's stride steadied. "Not perfectly. Not all at once." Mile 16 passed. The twist that broke mile 16 open came from a direction nobody had anticipated. Captain James Reeder caught up with Maya at mile 16.8. Reeder was not a man who ran during a ruck. He was not a man who flagged down a specific soldier mid-course for a conversation that was not required by protocol. He was a man who kept his clipboard and his radio and his carefully preserved neutrality, the neutrality she had watched him choose at 430 when Holloway made his comment and Reeder wrote a note and looked away. He was sweating. He had clearly been moving at pace to reach her. "Lieutenant Caldwell," he fell in beside her, slightly out of breath. "Captain, I need to tell you something." He paused to collect himself. "Off the record, I'm not putting this in the event log." She looked at him sideways. "The gear inspection at mile 11, he said. "Holloway ordered it specifically, not a random audit. He flagged your name before we even started. I assumed as much," she said. "What you don't know," Reeder said, "is what he said to me when he called it in. He told me, and I'm giving you his exact words, that he expected us to find your pack underweighted." The word sat in the air between them, underweighted. The implication was specific and it was ugly, that Maya had loaded her rucksack with lighter materials or removed required items to fake compliance with the weight standard. A cheat, a deliberate deception. She kept walking. Her expression didn't change. "He told you to look for evidence that I was cheating," she said. "Yes, and then the inspection came back clean, complete to the last item," Reeder said. "Everything required, nothing prohibited except the notebook, which is a personal item with no bearing on weight compliance." She nodded once. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. Reeder was quiet for a moment. "Because I wrote a note at 430 and looked away," he said. "And I've been carrying that since mile 1. She looked at him then. Not accusatory, not forgiving, just clear-eyed, the look of someone who had learned to evaluate people in real time, rather than waiting for them to reveal themselves slowly. "You could file a report," she said. "I could," he said. But you'd have to bring a complaint first," he said. "And I don't think you're going to do that." She faced forward. "No," she said, "I'm not. Because I'm on mile 16 of a 22-mile ruck," she said. "And because I don't win anything by bringing a complaint. And because the only thing I've ever wanted was to finish without someone carrying my pack." Reeder was quiet. Then he said, "You're carrying other people's packs, though." "That's different," she said. "How?" "Because I chose to," she said. "That's the whole point." He walked with her for a quarter-mile more, and then he peeled off back toward the checkpoint, back toward his clipboard and his radio and his event log. But he was not neutral anymore, and he knew it, and so did she. At mile 17, Torres did something that cost him. The name attached to Torres's rucksack was Corporal Diana Reyes, a Signal Corps soldier killed during a communications operation 3 years earlier. Torres had looked up the name online the night before the event. He had read the summary of her service, the brief official notice, the one photograph that existed in the public record. He had gone to sleep thinking about her and woken up thinking about her. At mile 17, his ankle turned on a loose rock. He caught himself, but barely one hand hitting the ground, the ankle bending further than it should before he recovered. He stood back up in 3 seconds and kept moving, but the damage was done. A sharp specific pain on the lateral side of his left ankle, familiar to anyone who had spent time on uneven terrain. He said nothing, he just kept walking. Maya knew within 30 seconds. She had seen his recovery, the brief controlled fall, the hand on the ground, the 3-second pause. She hadn't said anything in the moment because saying something in the moment would have stopped him, and stopping him at mile 17 with 5 miles left was a cruelty that served no one. But now she was watching his gait, left foot, landing harder on the heel, absorbing impact away from the lateral side. Protecting it, working around it, she moved alongside him. "Torres, your ankle." He didn't look at her. "It's manageable." "I didn't ask if it was manageable. I asked about your ankle." "It's fine, ma'am, Torres." He finally looked at her. "If I stop now, I won't start again," he said. "I know myself well enough to know that. My body is looking for a reason, and if I stop for even 2 minutes, it'll find one." She studied him for a moment. "How bad a 3?" he said. "Out of 10, it'll be a 6 by mile 19, she said. "Then I finish before it's a 6, he said. She pulled a strip of athletic tape from her medbag. Without breaking, he had been carrying it accessible since Hendrix at mile 5 and handed it to him. "Cross-tape it as you walk," she said. "Figure 8 over the lateral malleolus. Don't wrap tight, just support." He took the tape. He started working on his ankle while walking, which was awkward and difficult and required a level of coordination that mile 17 discouraged. He finished it in 90 seconds. "Better?" she asked. "Better," he said. They walked. "Ma'am," he said after a while. "Torres, why does it feel like you're responsible for all of us?" She didn't answer right away. "You're carrying Corporal Reyes," she said. "I'm carrying Mercer. We're all carrying somebody. When you carry someone, you don't just carry the name. You carry the fact that they couldn't finish, and that means finishing matters in a different way than it used to." He thought about that. "Is that why you help people? Because they can't?" "I help people," she said, "because I've seen what happens when nobody does." Torres looked at the name on his shoulder strap, Corporal Diana Reyes. He straightened up an inch, his stride steadied. He said nothing else. The soldiers in Holloway's cohort had been told he was being monitored and was stable. They had been told to continue the course. Most of them did. But as the word spread through the formation, the specific, slightly distorted word that moved through military units the way water moved through rock, finding every crack, the thing that spread was not just the news of Holloway going down. It was the news of who had responded, the woman he told to get her pack carried. She ran the whole medical response. She was already 13 miles in. 45 pounds on her back, she knew exactly what to do. And she kept going after. These fragments moved through the formation ahead of Maya, changing the temperature of the air in front of her before she arrived. Soldiers who hadn't spoken to her all morning were looking at her differently now. Not with the calculating skepticism that a leader earned by performance reviews and promotion boards, but with the simpler, more durable recognition that military people gave each other in the field when they witnessed something real. She didn't know it was happening. She was too focused on the trail, on the soldiers around her, on the math of miles remaining and the assessment she was running continuously on every person in her cohort. But Paulson knew. Paulson had been in the Army for 19 years, and he had a particular skill for reading formations, for sensing the shift in collective attitude the way an old sailor sensed a change in weather. He looked at the formation ahead and then behind, and then he looked at Maya walking with her pack and Torres at her shoulder and the rest of them distributed around her like a gravitational pull she wasn't aware she was exerting, and he said quietly, to no one in particular, He had never seen it happen so fast, and he had been watching it happen since mile 3. The big twist came at mile 18. Not from the terrain, not from the weather, from a radio call. Reader's voice came over the checkpoint frequency at mile 18, and the message was relayed down the line by the checkpoint NCO in a voice that was carefully official but not quite neutral enough to hide the weight of what it contained. Message for Lieutenant Caldwell. Message from the Event Oversight Committee. Maya stopped. The soldiers around her stopped. "Go ahead," she said. "Sergeant Major Holloway's rucksack," the ensign said. "He's been removed from active participation per medical protocol. His name carrier, Staff Sergeant Ryan Mercer, is being flagged for administrative removal from the completion record." She stood very still. "What does that mean?" Torres has asked, because he didn't understand the language yet. Paulson did. Paulson answered in a voice that was quiet and flat. "It means Mercer's name doesn't cross the finish line." Torres looked at Maya. Her expression had done something specific, not broken, nothing so dramatic as that, but changed. The way a face changed when a piece of information arrived that required everything you had learned about controlling your reactions to be called into service all at once. Staff Sergeant Ryan Mercer, the name on her rucksack. The name she had been carrying since mile 1. The name she had carried on a mountain 3 years ago when the world was on fire and her legs were giving out and she had 4 more miles to go before the casualty collection point. And now his name was going to be flagged, not completed, not crossed the finish line, just removed, the same word they had used in the official report. Mission outcome non-completion, casualty recovered. Not finished, just taken off the record. She looked at the checkpoint NCO. Who has authority to override the administrative flag? The event director, he said. Captain Reader, get him on the radio. The owl, she said. One word, clean. No anger in it, just the certainty of someone who is not asking permission but issuing a statement. The NCO keyed his radio. While they waited for Reader's voice, Torres looked at Maya and said quietly, Ma'am, what are you thinking? She didn't answer immediately. She looked at the trail. 4 miles remaining. Holloway's rucksack was at the mile 15 checkpoint, where the medical team had left it. 3 miles back, she did the math. It was the kind of math that the body did differently than the mind said impossible. But the body, which had been walking for 17 miles and was still walking, said something else. Something quieter. Something that wasn't about what was possible so much as what was required. Reader's voice came on the radio, called Captain. The administrative flag on Mercer's record. I know why you're calling, he said. Then you know what I'm going to ask. A pause on the radio that lasted long enough that Torres shifted his weight. There's no protocol for this, Lieutenant Reader said. Is there a rule against it? Another pause. The rule is that every soldier who starts has to finish. It doesn't specify that a soldier can only carry 1 pack. She said nothing. She waited. The pack is at the mile 15 checkpoint, Reader said. I know where it is, she said. That's 3 miles back. I know how far it is. A very long pause. If you go back for it, Reader said, you're adding 6 miles to your total. You're at mile 17. That makes it 23 miles to your finish. 28, she said. He went quiet. If I go back 3 miles and then continue forward, she said, my total is 28. Not 23. Caldwell, is there a rule against it, Captain? The radio was silent for 5 seconds, 7 seconds. No, Reader said, there is not a rule against it. She handed the radio back to the checkpoint NCO. She turned to the soldiers around her. Okonkwo was looking at her with an expression that was not quite disbelief but was close to it, the look of someone watching a decision being made that they understand intellectually but cannot quite absorb emotionally. Paulson's face was doing something complicated. Bivens looked like he was about to say something, and then thought better of it. Torres said, you can't add 11 miles. I'm not adding 11 miles, she said. I'm going back 3 and continuing forward. That's 28 total. 28 miles, he said, with 2 rucksacks. After I get the second one, she said, yes, ma'am. He moved in front of her. Not blocking, he wasn't capable of that kind of authority, and he knew it, but placing himself in her line of sight, requiring her to look at him. Listen to me. You've already saved 2 soldiers today. 3 if you count Hendricks. You've carried 45 pounds for 17 miles. You are running on the last thing your body has. If you go back 3 miles and pick up Holloway's pack, which is heavier than yours, and carry them both for 8 more miles. He carried Ryan Mercer's name, she said. It was quiet. It wasn't an interruption so much as a correction. That name has to cross the finish line. I don't care what it cost me. Because of the mission 3 years ago, Paulson said. She looked at him. Because of what Ryan Mercer was, she said. Not what happened to him, what he was. Torres started to speak again. She put a hand on his shoulder. Tora, her voice was warm. Not soft, there was iron in it, but warm. You know what you told me earlier about your sister? About walking in anyway, he nodded. Then you understand, she said. He was quiet for a moment, then he stepped aside. She turned back toward mile 15. She walked 3 miles back, into the heat and the wind and the trail she had already covered, carrying 45 pounds, going back for more. She reached the mile 15 checkpoint at a pace that surprised the medical team still stationed there. Holloway's rucksack was on the table where the team had left it. 52 pounds. She had read the required weight when the event roster went out. 52 pounds. She stood at the table and looked at the rucksack for exactly 3 seconds. Then she looked at the name tag secured to the left shoulder strap. Staffed Ryan Mercer, she reached out and touched it. Not ceremony, not performance, just contact. The way you touched something to confirm it was real. The medic at the checkpoint, young, probably 21, wearing the look of someone who had not yet made enough mistakes to be humble about their profession, said, "Ma'am, you shouldn't." "I know," she said. She shouldered her own pack. She lifted Holloway's rucksack and held it against her front. reconfiguring the load in the way that someone who understood load distribution would pack to the chest, her own on her back, weight distributed across her hips and her spine, and the muscle groups that had been working for 17 miles and were about to be asked to work much harder. 97 pounds, total her own weight she adjusted. She breathed, she walked. The half-mile back toward the course was the hardest half-mile she had run in years. Not because of the weight, though the weight was extraordinary, but because of what she was thinking. She was thinking about a mountain. About a night 3 years ago when she had carried Ryan Mercer for 4 miles under fire in darkness on terrain that had been trying to kill everyone who moved on it, and she had not stopped, not once. Not even when her legs stopped being legs and became something mechanical, just things that moved because stopping would mean something she was not willing to accept. She had carried him. She had gotten him to the collection point. She had handed him to the surgical team. She had sat outside the tent for 6 hours and told herself he was going to be okay. And then he wasn't. And the report had taken the story of what she had done and rewritten it into a different story, a story about a medic who made bad decisions under pressure, a story about a mission outcome that was labeled non-completion, a story that stripped out everything that was true and replaced it with something that was easier to file. She had spent 3 years carrying that story. Carrying it the way you carried something that didn't belong to you, but that nobody else would pick up, with the specific exhaustion of a person who knows the weight is unjust and carries it anyway because the alternative is letting it drop. Now she was carrying something that weighed 97 pounds. And it was lighter than what she had been carrying in her chest for 3 years. That was not a metaphor. It was the simplest, most honest thing she had thought all day. She walked faster. At mile 18.3, when she rejoined the course moving forward, Torres was waiting. He was standing at the trail junction, pack on, water in hand. He looked at her, really looked at her, the way people looked when they were absorbing something that was changing what they believed the world allowed, and then he held out the water. She took it, she drank, she handed it back, she started moving. He moved 20 paces, Okonkwo materialized on her left. After 50, Paulson fell in behind, Bivansy. 3 more soldiers whose names she hadn't learned yet, but who had been walking the course near her all morning. Nobody said anything, nobody announced a plan, they just walked. With her, around her, close enough that the dust of their footfalls mixed together into one sound, not the sound of 41 individuals on a course, but something more coherent than that. Something that had the shape of a decision made collectively and without discussion. She was carrying 97 pounds, they were carrying whatever they had. Together it was enough, and they still had 4 miles to go. The finish line was not yet visible, but it was no longer something she was reaching for. It was something she was bringing the names to, both of them. All of them, every name in that green notebook. She walked into mile 19 with her shoulders level and her breathing controlled, and the name of Ryan Mercer pressed against her chest, and the name of Ryan Mercer on her back, and the sun dropping at a long angle across the desert, and 7 soldiers around her who had stopped being bystanders and become something else entirely. She didn't have a word for what they had become, but she felt it the way you felt a hand on your shoulder in the dark, not weight. Support, something entirely different. She walked. The first thing Maya noticed at mile 19 was that her hips had stopped feeling like hips. They were still functioning, still rotating, still distributing load, still doing everything the human body was designed to do under weight, but the sensation of them as a specific, owned part of her body had disappeared somewhere in the 3 miles she had just walked backward into the heat and the wind. What remained was more general than that, a pressure, a conversation between gravity and muscle that she was observing from a slight distance, the way you observed something you had no intention of stopping. She kept walking. Torres was on her right. His tape job was holding. She checked his gait every quarter mile without appearing to, and his ankle was giving him trouble, but not the kind that created a cascade. He was managing it. She had taught him enough on miles 3 through 10 that he was managing it without being told. Okonkwo was on her left. He had stopped talking, which was not a bad sign with Okonkwo. She had learned quickly that his sign was not distress. It was focus. The man internal on his best mind. Paulson was behind her, and she could tell from his breathing pattern that he had found something in the last 2 miles that he had been missing for the first 17. The thing he'd found after talking about his daughter at the piano. He had settled into the ruck the way experienced soldiers, settled, not comfortable, nothing comfortable about it, but reconciled. Moving and reconciled. Bivens had stopped complaining entirely, which was its own form of communication. And Dempsey was the one she watched most carefully, because Dempsey had the farthest to fall if something else broke through his composure. And the thing about a man's composure at mile 19 was that it was being held together by fewer and fewer things. So far, it was holding. The weight on Maya's body was not evenly distributed, and this was the thing that nobody watching from the outside could fully understand, because from the outside it looked like a woman carrying 2 rucksacks, which was remarkable enough. But from the inside it was something more specific and more demanding than that. 45 pounds on her back, loaded into her own frame, adjusted for her body, her spine, her stride, familiar weight and familiar configuration, the weight she had been carrying for 19 miles. Which her muscles had memorized the way hands memorized a tool they used daily, and 52 pounds pressed against her chest and stomach, held in place by a cross-strap improvisation she had rigged at the mile 15 checkpoint, weight distributed across her clavicles and breastbone and wrapped forearms. The pack stabilized but not comfortable, never comfortable, because there was no configuration that made an external 52-pound load comfortable against a human chest. Her center of gravity had shifted. Her stride had shortened by 3 inches. She had measured this, not consciously, but by the arithmetic of footfall spacing she tracked automatically. Her breathing was costing her more because the weight against her chest was restricting her rib cage expansion by an estimated 15%. And her lower back was having a specific pointed conversation with her that she was not ready to have back with it yet. She was aware of all of this. She cataloged it. She chose not to act on any of it. She kept walking. What she didn't know, what she couldn't see, because she was looking forward, was what was happening behind her. Captain Reeder had relayed her decision back through the radio net within 60 seconds of the call. The checkpoint NCOs passed it to their teams. The medical team at mile 15 passed it to Briggs, who was still with Holloway at the forward casualty position. And Briggs, who was professional and measured and not given to editorial commentary about soldiers' decisions, looked at the message on his radio and said quietly, to no one in particular, she went back. Holloway was sitting up on the stretcher, IV running, vitals stabilizing, the color mostly returned to his face. He had been listening to radio traffic for the last 40 minutes with the focused attention of a man who had lost control of a situation he was used to controlling and was trying to understand what was happening to his course from a stretcher. He had heard the administrative flag on Mercer's record. He had heard Maya's radio exchange with Reeder. He had heard the checkpoint NCO's report. Lieutenant Caldwell has turned back to the mile 15 checkpoint. She is retrieving the additional rucksack. He lay on the stretcher for a moment with that information. Briggs watched him. She went back 3 miles, Holloway said. Not a question. She's carrying both packs. Yes, sir. A silence. That's nearly 100 pounds. By my estimate, yes, sir. Holloway said nothing for a long time. Then he said, Mercer's name is on my pack. That's correct, sir. Another silence. She knows that. Yes, sir, Briggs said. I imagine she does. Holloway turned his head and looked at the trail, at the long stretch of dust and rock that he could see from the stretcher, the trail where he had fallen, where Maya had reached him in 8 seconds and run the response with the precision of someone who had practiced this in circumstances far worse than this. He thought about her voice. Sergeant Major, stay with me. Help is coming. I need you to breathe slowly. Match my pace. He thought about the name on his rucksack. He thought about 3 years. He thought about an 11-page report he had read under bad light with a cup of cold coffee. A report he had accepted as fact because it was official, and because she was a lieutenant, and because he had already decided who she was before he reached the 3rd page. He thought about the notebook in her rucksack, dozens of names. People she refused to forget. He put both hands over his face. He stayed like that for a while. Briggs looked away and gave him the dignity of not being watched. At mile 19.5, Sergeant First Class Paulson moved up beside Maya. He had been behind her for the better part of 2 miles, and he had clearly been working up to something. She could feel it in the formation, the way she felt changes in gait, a particular quality of attention gathering itself into language. Caldwell, he said. Paulson, I've been thinking about something. Does it need to wait? He paused. I've been in the Army 19 years. I know, I've met a lot of officers. She said nothing. She let him build it. Most of them, he said, are good at either leading or caring. The ones who are good at leading are usually a little cold. The ones who care are usually a little soft. The combination is, he searched for the word, rare. She didn't respond to the compliment. She had learned early that responding to compliments during a ruck was a luxury that cost energy she didn't have. She just walked the Mount Airy thing, Paulson said. I want to say something about it. I was in Kandahar, the same rotation you were in Airy, he said. Different unit, different sector, but I heard about the Mercer extraction. Not from the report, from a combat controller who was on the radio net that night. She went very still inside her stride. Her feet kept moving. Her face didn't change, but something in her chest did. What did he say? She asked. Her voice was even. Careful. He said the medic on that team made the call that saved 2 lives that night, Paulson said. Not lost one, saved 2. He said the direct route was compromised active fire, no cover, 15 meters of exposure that would have been fatal for anyone carrying a casualty. He said the medic identified it in real time and rerouted without hesitation. She was quiet. He also said the medic carried the casualty solo for nearly the entire extraction because the 2 other team members were suppressing fire and couldn't break contact. Maya said nothing. 4 miles, Paulson said, solo carry under fire, mountain terrain. Still nothing from her, and the report, Paulson said you failed. She looked straight ahead. The report said a lot of things, she said. Was any of it true? Mercer died, she said. That part was true, but not because of you. She was quiet for a long time. Long enough that Torres looked sideways at her, wondering if she was going to answer. I've spent 3 years asking myself that question, she said finally. Every version of the answer I come up with is the same. I made the best decisions I could with what I knew at the time in conditions I couldn't control. He still died. Those 2 things are both true and they don't cancel each other out, and I've learned to carry both of them. Paulson nodded slowly. That's the hardest kind of thing to carry, he said. Yes, she said simply. It is. They walked. After a while, Paulson said, the controller who told me that story. His name was Garza. He said if he ever met the medic from that night, he'd buy them a drink. Despite everything, despite the weight and the miles and the specific grinding exhaustion of mile 19 with 4 miles left and 97 pounds, and a back that had moved well past complaint into something quieter and more concerning, Maya almost smiled. Tell Garza I drink coffee, she said. Paulson actually laughed. It was the kind of laugh that surprised him, surprised the people around him too, because nothing about mile 19 suggested laughter, but it came out anyway, genuine and brief and gone almost as quickly as it arrived. But it changed something in the air, infinitesimally. Enough. The major turn arrived at mile 20, and it came from the most unexpected direction possible. Lieutenant Barker, who had apologized at mile 15 and spent the last 5 miles in the middle of the formation saying almost nothing. Barker, who had been the voice at the water station, telling someone who turned out to be standing 8 feet away that she had probably frozen, probably panicked, that the investigation had been kind because nobody wanted to write the paperwork it took to be unkind. At mile 20, Barker walked up beside Maya and said, I need to tell you something. She looked at him. If it's another apology, Barker, save it. It's not, he said. It's information. She waited. My father was on the Mount Airy review board, he said. The sentence landed in the space between them like something dropped from a height. She stopped walking. For the first time in miles, she actually stopped. The soldiers around her registered it, a ripple effect moving through the formation as the people behind her adjusted, as Torres looked at her face and then at Barker and went very still. Your father, she said. Colonel Richard Barker, Barker said. He was the senior reviewing officer on the investigation. She looked at him for a long moment. Barker met her eyes. He was not comfortable. He was not performing comfort. He was a man who had been carrying something since the water station, maybe longer, and had decided that the weight of it was less acceptable than the cost of putting it down. He told me about the case, Barker said, not officially. Informally, the way he talked about cases that bothered him. He said he stopped, started again. He said the evidence was incomplete. He said the findings were driven partly by command pressure to produce an actionable finding. A unit had lost a soldier on an extraction and the battalion wanted a causal factor they could point to. The air was very quiet around them. Even the wind had dropped. He said it bothered him, Barker continued. He said he signed the report because the command wanted closure and the evidence wasn't strong enough to fight the finding. But it bothered him. Maya was looking at him with an expression that had moved through several things in rapid succession: shock, calculation, something that might have been grief and had arrived somewhere that was harder to read. He signed it, she said. Yes, it bothered him and he signed it. Yes, Barker said. She looked away. She started walking again. Why are you telling me this, she said. Her voice was controlled, but only by effort. Anyone standing close enough could hear the effort in it. Because you're carrying his pack, Barker said. He fell in beside her. Because you went back 3 miles in a 100-degree desert to make sure Ryan Mercer's name crossed a finish line. Because my father's signature is part of the reason it took 3 years for anyone to care whether that name got where it was supposed to go. She walked, and because Barker said quietly, I said what I said at the water station because I believed what he told me. The official version. And I never questioned it because he's my father and I trusted him. And now, she said, now I've watched you for 19 miles, he said. And I know the official version isn't the real one. She said nothing for a while. What do you want me to do with that information, Barker, she said. He was quiet. I don't know, he said. I think I wanted you to know that someone on that board knew it was wrong. Even if he didn't stop it, that doesn't change the report, she said. No, he said, it doesn't. It doesn't change 3 years. No, he said, it doesn't. So what does it change? Barker thought about it. Maybe nothing, he said. Maybe I just needed to say it to someone who deserved to hear it. She walked with that for a long time. The formation moved around her, across mile 20, into the last stretch of flat before the final approach, and she walked with the 97 pounds, and the name against her chest, and the name on her shoulder strap, and the information that had just been handed to her like a stone she didn't have room to carry. And then slowly she made a decision. Your father, she said. Yes, when this is over, she said. I want to talk to him. Barker looked at her. That's not what I expected you to say, he said. What did you expect? I don't anger. Something. I'm angry, she said simply. I'm also strategic. Those two things can coexist. He was quiet. I'll make the call, he said. Good. They walked. Mile 20.4 was where Tosei's ankle finally spoke up loudly enough that ignoring it required active effort. He had been managing it with the tape job and the borrowed technique shorter stride, more deliberate heel strike, redistributing the force, but 20 miles of management was doing what 20 miles of management did to a grade 2 sprain, accumulating. Building, turning from a conversation into a demand. He didn't say anything, he kept walking. It was Okonkwo who noticed first. Torres, he said. I'm good, Torres said immediately. You're favoring it again. It's fine, it's not fine, Okonkwo said. Your left strike is off. Been off for the last quarter mile. I said. I'm Maya's voice, even. Non-negotiable. Stop for 30 seconds, ma'am. 30 seconds, she said. We retape and you drink and then you walk. If you don't stop now, you won't make it to the finish on your own power. And you are going to make it to the finish on your own power. He stopped. She was at his ankle in 15 seconds. Despite the weight she was carrying, she knelt with the careful deliberateness of someone managing load on an already taxed frame, and retaped the lateral side with the precision that came from doing this in conditions where getting it right was the difference between someone walking out and someone getting carried. Drink, she said, handing him her canteen. He drank. Now walk, she said. He walked 32 seconds total. How did you know it was 30 seconds and not 2 minutes? He asked. Because 2 minutes was what your body wanted, she said. And your body is a liar at mile 20, he almost laughed. What does 30 seconds do that 2 minutes doesn't? 30 seconds lets you rest the joint without letting your brain believe you've stopped, she said. Once your brain believes you've stopped, it starts negotiating. He thought about that. Is that what you do with yourself, he said. Every mile since mile 15, she said. He looked at her, at the two packs, at the level shoulders, at the breathing that was controlled even when it shouldn't have been, and he said, How are you still walking? She didn't answer immediately. When she did, it was quiet. Because the alternative is not walking, she said. And I don't know how to do that. At mile 21, the formation heard the crowd before they saw the finish line. Not a roar, nothing so cinematic as that. Just voices carried on the air, the particular ambient sound of people gathered in one place and waiting for something. Torres heard it first. Is that the finish line? Paulson confirmed. 1 more mile. 1 more mile. The words moved through the formation differently for different people. For Torres, they were permission, the mathematical confirmation that what he had been promised was actually true, that the distance had been real and the end was also real. For Okonkwo, they landed like a bell, something he had been waiting for, that required no emotion, because the emotion was already there, just waiting for the signal. For Paulson, 1 more mile was 19 years of 1 more miles, all of them stacked, all of them earned, this one in a line with the others. For Maya, 1 more mile was Ryan Mercer. 1 more mile was the name against her chest, and the name on her shoulder strap, and the name in the report, and the name in her notebook, and the name she had said aloud to herself. On a mountain, at 3 in the morning when everything was wrong, getting him out alive was the only thing she had left to organize herself around. She adjusted the front pack. She straightened her spine against the back one. She breathed. She walked into mile 21. The crowd sound changed quality as the formation got closer. It had been ambient, a general noise of gathered people, and then it became specific. Individual voices resolving out of the collective. Words, not just sound, and what the words were doing was not cheering. The crowd was watching. Maya came around the final bend in the trail and saw them: soldiers, officers, families, medical personnel, checkpoint staff, the event administrative team, all of them lined along the final approach to the finish line. And all of them, as she came into view, went quiet. Not the quiet of disinterest, the opposite. The specific, concentrated quiet of people who had been told something was happening and were now watching it happen and had discovered that the reality was larger than the description. Torres felt it hit him before he understood what it was. Why are they quiet? He said. Because they heard, Paulson said. Heard what? What she did, Paulson said. Word moved fast. Torres looked at the crowd, and then at Maya, and then at the two rucksacks, the one on her back, the one against her chest, the names on both, and he felt something close to what he would later call the most clarifying moment of his life. Not because it was dramatic, though it was, but because it showed him something simple and irreducible, that the person who everyone expected to fail had not failed, had not stopped, had not put down what she was carrying even when every physical signal in her body was telling her to. And nobody had carried her pack, not 1 pound of it. She had carried theirs. The last half mile was the hardest half mile of the course. Not because of the terrain, because of the silence. Because when you could hear the crowd and they were quiet, and when you could feel the weight of their attention the way you felt weather, and when you knew what you were carrying and why the last half mile became something more than endurance. It became testimony. Maya walked it with her jaw set and her eyes forward and her breathing costing her more than she let show. Torres walked at her right shoulder, Okonkwo at her left, Polson behind. Bivens, Dempsey, Barker, and 3 other soldiers whose names she had learned on the course Manning, Osei, Tran surrounding her in the loose, organic formation that had assembled itself without command and sustained itself without discussion. Nobody spoke, nobody needed to. The crowd at the finish line was still quiet. And then, as Maya crossed the final 100 meters, someone in the crowd started clapping. Not a roar, not an in-person. Then another. Then, in the way that honest recognition spread differently from performed enthusiasm, slower at first because people needed to decide if they believed what they were feeling before they expressed it, spread. By the time she was 50 meters out, the crowd was not quiet. And it had become something she was not ready for, because she had not been prepared for it. She had been prepared to finish, not to be seen finishing, and those were 2 completely different things. She kept walking 50 meters, 30, 20. At 15 meters, she saw Holloway. He was standing at the finish line, not on the stretcher. Standing, his IV had been removed. He was in a dry shirt. His face was still pale and his legs were not entirely steady, and he was standing because he had told Briggs he was going to stand whether Briggs agreed or not, and after a certain point Briggs had agreed. He was holding something. She recognized it when she was 10 meters out. A white cloth strip, his name tape, his rank, and below it, attached to the name tape by a strip of field tape, another name. Staff Ryan Mercer. He was holding both names out. Not ceremonially, not like a performance, like an offering. The way you offered something you had no right to take back and no ability to restore, but that you could finally put in the right hands. Maya crossed the finish line. She stopped. She stood. For a moment she was simply breathing the specific, controlled breathing of someone who has been managing their body at its maximum for a long time, and is now telling it that the management can stop, that it can cost what it costs, that the performance is over. Her legs were shaking, not visibly or barely visibly, but she could feel it. The kind of shake that started in the muscle and hadn't reached the surface yet. Holloway stepped forward. He was a large man, and he had been near death 4 hours ago, and he was standing in front of a woman carrying almost 100 pounds on a body that had covered 28 miles. And he had the expression of a man who had been wrong in a specific and durable way and had no mechanism for the experience, because it hadn't happened to him enough times to have developed one. Lieutenant Caldwell, he said. His voice was rough. Medical rough and something else rough. I need to say something. She looked at him. She was still breathing carefully. She said nothing. I've been in this army for 30 years, he said. I've known soldiers and I've assessed soldiers and I thought I was good at it. He paused. I was not good at it today. I was not good at it 3 days ago when I read a file and decided what I knew before I knew anything. The crowd was silent again. I told people to carry your pack this morning, he said. That was wrong, not because it was unkind, because it was inaccurate. Because the soldier standing in front of me right now spent this entire day carrying what nobody else would touch. He extended the names toward her, his name, Ryan Mercer's name. Both of them crossed the finish line, he said, because of you. She looked at the names. She looked at his face. She reached out and took them. Not because the gesture solved anything, not because it erased 3 years, but because Ryan Mercer's name was supposed to cross the finish line, and it had. And someone needed to hold it, and she was the right person to hold it. She held both names in one hand. She unclipped the name strip from Holloway's rucksack and held it alongside hers in the other. 3 names, hers, his, Mercer's. She looked at them for a moment. Then she put them in her chest pocket, over her heart, where she had been carrying them all along. The crowd was not quiet anymore. Torres was crying and not trying to hide it. Okonkwo had his hand on Torres's shoulder. Paulson was looking at the ground. Barker was looking at his phone. He had dialed a number. It was ringing. His father answered on the second ring. I'm at the finish line, Barker said, and I think you need to hear about today. The crowd had not fully dispersed when Captain James Reeder walked to the event table, picked up his clipboard, looked at it for a long moment, and set it back down. Not because he was done with it, because he was done with what it represented. He had been keeping records all morning: split times, gear verifications, administrative flags, protocol notations, the careful, neutral documentation of a man who had decided early in his career that his job was to record events rather than shape them. He had been good at this. He had been promoted partly because of this. The Army rewarded people who kept clean records and created minimal friction, and Reeder had spent 11 years being that person with quiet, professional consistency. He looked at his clipboard. He looked at Maya Caldwell, 20 feet away, still carrying 97 pounds because she hadn't taken either pack off, yet she was standing at the finish line talking to Torres, and Torres was talking back. And the weight was still on her body because apparently putting it down had not yet become a priority. Reeder picked the clipboard back up. He started writing something that was not a split time. Maya finally allowed Torres to help her with the front pack. Not because she asked, because he reached for it without asking and she let him, which was its own kind of statement that she could recognize when accepting help was not the same as needing someone to carry her pack. Torres lifted Holloway's rucksack away from her chest and felt the weight of it in his hands and looked at her. "You carried this for 8 miles, he said. 7.3, she said. "On top of your own 45. "Yes." He held the pack and looked at it, and then at her, and said something she didn't expect. "I want to be the soldier you are when I've been in as long as you have." She looked at him, not with the deflection she usually deployed for compliments, not with the efficient nod and the redirect. She looked at him directly, and something in her face did what faces did when they received something they had stopped expecting. "You already are," she said. "You just don't know it yet." He didn't know what to do with that either. So they both stood at the finish line in the particular silence of two people who have said true things to each other and run out of words. It was Paulson who broke it, because Paulson was constitutionally incapable of leaving silence in a room that needed filling. "Someone get this woman water," he said loudly, to no one in particular, before she decides to go back and carry the rest of the course too. The laugh that followed was real, and it loosened something in Maya's chest that had been tight since mile 15. The medical team came to her 15 minutes after the finish. She had been expecting them. She knew her own body well enough to know that she had been running on controlled adrenaline for the last 4 miles, and that the moment the adrenaline dropped, the full accounting would arrive. She had been managing the invoice. She knew what was on it. The team medic Fuentes, the same one who had cleared Hendricks at mile 5 and complimented her tap job, sat up at a folding table and gestured for her to sit. She sat. He checked her blood pressure first. He read it. He read it again. "How are you feeling?" he said. "Functional," she said. "Your blood pressure says you're running on 3% of your actual reserves." "That tracks." He looked at her. "Ma'am, that's not a joke." "I know," she said. "Check everything you need to check. I'm not going anywhere." He worked methodically: pressure, pulse, hydration assessment, a brief neurological screen that she passed efficiently because she had administered the same screen hundreds of times and knew what it was asking before the questions came. While Fuentes worked, Specialist Webb Holloway's aide appeared at her elbow. He had been the one relaying information all morning, the young soldier who had described her behavior on the course to his sergeant major with careful professional neutrality. He looked like he had been trying to decide something since mile 12. "Ma'am," he said. She looked at him over Fuentes' shoulder. "Sergeant Major Holloway is asking if you'll speak with him," Webb said. "When you're done here." "Where is he?" "Medical station." 20 meters west," she nodded. "Tell him 10 minutes. Webb nodded and went. Fuentes finished his assessment and made notes and said, "You need fluids, food, and approximately 14 hours of horizontal time." "I'll take 2 of the 3, she said. "Ma'am, I'll take 2 of the 3 right now," she said. "The third one after." He handed her an electrolyte packet and a water bottle and watched her with the expression of someone who had entered a professional decision and was not going to win it. She drank. She ate the protein bar he produced from his kit. She stood up. "Thank you, Fuentes," she said. "You did good work today, ma'am," he said. Hendricks's ankle, the hydration management, Holloway's initial stabilization. He paused. "Really good work." She looked at him. "You taught me the cross tape," he said. "Mile 5, I watched your technique and I've been doing it wrong for 2 years. She almost smiled. "The angle on the lateral malleolus," she said. 45 degrees, not 60. Most of the field manuals have it wrong. "I'll fix mine," he said. She walked toward the medical station. Holloway was sitting on a cot, not lying down, sitting, which she recognized as a concession between what his body wanted and what his ego would permit. He had his forearms on his knees, and he was looking at his hands when she arrived, and he looked up when he heard her approach, and the thing on his face was something she had not seen from him before. Not authority, not assessment, just a man, Lieutenant, he said. Sergeant Major. She sat in the chair across from him without waiting to be invited. He noted this, he said nothing about it. Briggs tells me your numbers are concerning, he said. Briggs worries appropriately, she said. I'm functional. You ran 28 miles with 97 pounds. 25 miles with 45 and a portion of it with 97, she said. The math is more complicated than it sounds. The math, he said, sounds like someone trying to kill themselves for a name on a pack. She looked at him. You carried his name, she said. Someone had to make sure it got there. He was quiet. I owe you more than an apology, he said. You don't owe me anything, Sergeant Major. I do, he said. Let me say it. She waited. He put his hands flat on his knees, the gesture of a man organizing himself for something that required more precision than he was used to. I read your file 3 days ago, he said, the Mount Airy report. I made a decision about who you were based on 11 pages written by people who weren't there and signed by a review board that was under command pressure to produce a finding. She said nothing. I took that decision into this course this morning, he said. And the first thing I did in front of every soldier on that line was tell them you needed help. Yes, she said. You did, not because of anything I observed, he said. Because of what I had already decided. Yes, he met her eyes. I've spent 30 years telling soldiers not to make assumptions before they have intelligence, he said. And I made one about you before I spent a single minute watching you operate. She considered him. What would you have needed to see, she said. He looked at her. The question had caught him. What do you mean? If you hadn't read the report, she said. If you had come to the line this morning knowing nothing about me. What would you have needed to see before you decided who I was? He was quiet for a long moment. Probably exactly what I watched you do today, he said. Then why, she said. Carefully, not unkindly, but directly, did the report matter more than what you could have seen in front of you? He didn't have an answer. That was the answer. He knew it. I'm going to request a review of the Mount Airy findings, he said. She went very still. I have standing to request it, he said. And after today I have documentation. Reader's been writing since the finish line. He's got a full operational log of your performance, what you did at mile 5 with Hendricks, the hydration intervention, the gear inspection results, the medical response when I went down. All of it. She processed this. A review doesn't guarantee anything, she said. No, he said. It goes back to a board. A different board, he said. Fresh eyes, current documentation. She was quiet for a long time. There's something you don't know, she said. He waited. Lieutenant Barker, she said. His father is Colonel Richard Barker. The name registered on Holloway's face. He was on the review board, Holloway said slowly. He was the senior reviewing officer, she said. Barker told me today at mile 20 that his father told him the evidence was incomplete, that the finding was driven by command pressure for a causal factor, and that signing the report bothered him. Holloway said nothing. The silence was the specific silence of a man reassessing the dimensions of a problem he thought he had understood. He signed it anyway, Holloway said. He signed it anyway, she confirmed. And his son told you this on mile 20, she said. While I was carrying 97 pounds, Holloway looked at his hands again. That's not just a review situation, he said. That's a misconduct finding if it holds up. I know, against a colonel, I know, she said. I've known what it would mean for 3 years. I've also known that going after it alone, without standing, without documentation, without a senior NCO willing to put his name behind a request. She stopped. It was a wall I couldn't get over. He looked up. She met his eyes. I'm not alone now, she said. Am I? And Holloway, Sergeant Major Derek Holloway, 30 years of service, 2 Bronze Stars, a Purple Heart he never mentioned. The strongest man most people in the unit had ever seen sat on his medical cot and understood that the woman he had told to get her pack carried at 430 had just asked him a question that would cost him something real if he answered it honestly. He had known since mile 15 when he lay on the ground and heard her voice above him that this day was going to require something from him. He had not known it would require this. No, he said. You're not alone. She nodded once. She stood up. Reader's documentation, she said. Make sure it includes the radio exchange about the administrative flag, the exact language used to describe Mercer's record. I'll call him now, Holloway said. She turned to go. Caldwell, she stopped. What you did today, he said. The whole of it, not just the medical response, not just the packs. The soldiers you kept moving, the ones you talked off the edge on the flats. Torres, Paulson, Dempsey. He paused. That's the thing the report never captured. You have never needed anyone to carry your pack. You've been too busy carrying everyone else's. She turned and looked at him. Ryan Mercer would have done the same, she said. That's what kind of soldier he was. That's why his name mattered enough to go back for. She left. Barker was outside the medical station when she came out. He was off his phone. His expression had the particular quality of a man who has had a difficult conversation and has not yet decided what to do with the aftermath. He answered. Barker said. "I know," she said. "I heard you dial from the finish line." "I told him what you did today," Barker said. "All of it. The 28 miles, the double pack. What Paulson told you about the combat controller Garza. What I told you at mile 20. She waited. "He was quiet for a long time," Barker said. "He said he stopped. He said he's been quiet for 3 years. She said nothing. He wants to meet with you," Barker said. "The sentence had weight," she said. "Voluntarily," Barker said. "He said if you want to file a formal correction request, he'll support it." She absorbed this. Barker looked at her. "Because I told him you went back 3 miles for a name," he said. And he said, and these are his exact words, "That's what we should have done 3 years ago." The air between them was very still. "It doesn't erase what he signed," she said. "No," Barker said. "He knows that. It doesn't give me 3 years back." "He knows that too." She was quiet. "Tell him I'll meet with him," she said. "Not yet, after the review request is filed and the process has structure. I'm not going to walk into a conversation with a colonel, with nothing in writing." "Understood," Barker said. And Barker, he looked at her. "What you told me at mile 20 cost you something," she said. "Telling me about your father, I know it did." He said nothing. "I don't take that lightly," she said. He nodded slowly. "For what it's worth," she said, "the thing you said at the water station. About panicking, about the investigation being kind." She paused. "You were repeating a story someone told you. That's different from inventing one." He looked at her with an expression that was not quite relief and not quite absolution, but was something in the space between them. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me," she said. "Just make sure you know the difference from now on between a story you were told and one you've verified." He straightened. "Yes, ma'am," he said. She walked. The debriefing session was scheduled for 1,600 hours at the main operations tent. It was standard post-event procedure. Event directors, checkpoint staff, senior NCOs, reviewing officers, a formal review of the day's conduct and outcomes before the completion records were filed. Maya was not originally on the attendee list. At 1,545, Reader added her name. At 1,550, Holloway added his name, which required Briggs to sign a medical release that Briggs signed under protest. At 1,555, Barker added his own name to the list, for reasons he did not explain to the administrative specialist who managed the roster. At 1,558, Paulson, Torres, Okonkwo Bivens, and Dempsey appeared at the tent entrance together and asked if the debriefing was open. The administrative specialist looked at the roster. He looked at the 5 soldiers. He looked at Reader, who had arrived and was arranging papers at the head of the table. Reader looked at the 5 soldiers. "It's open," he said. They came in. The debriefing started the way debriefings always started, procedurally, with outcomes review, completion numbers, medical incident summary, gear verification results. Reader ran it with the same methodical precision he brought to everything, and for the first 12 minutes it was entirely standard. Then Reader set down the procedural papers. He picked up a different set of papers. Handwritten, dense, 12 pages. "I want to enter something into the operational record," he said. "An addendum to the standard event documentation." The room was quiet. "This is a first-person account of events I observed during the course of today's Iron Valley Challenge," he said. "It covers the period from 430 hours to completion. It includes direct observations of Lieutenant Maya Caldwell's conduct throughout the event, and it includes documentation of the administrative flag issued regarding Staff Sergeant Mercer's completion record, including the language used in that communication." He set the papers on the table. "I'm formally requesting that this be attached to the event record and forwarded to the Division Personnel Office." The event director, a lieutenant colonel named Marsh, who had run Iron Valley for 6 consecutive years, looked at the papers and then at Reader. "Captain," Marsh said, "that's an unusual request." "Yes, sir," Reader said. "It's an unusual document. It describes an unusual day." Marsh looked at Holloway. Holloway, sitting at the table in a chair he had moved from the side of the tent, because he was not a man who sat at the side of rooms, said, "I'm supporting the request, sir." Marsh looked at him. "I'm also filing a separate request through command channels," Holloway said. "A formal review of the Mount Airy extraction report from 3 years ago, based on new information regarding the completeness of the original investigation." The tent was very quiet. "New information," Marsh said carefully. "Information that wasn't included in the original findings," Holloway said. "Information that materially changes the assessment of the outcome." Marsh looked at Maya. She was sitting at the table with her hands folded in front of her, and her posture correct and her expression entirely composed. The expression of someone who had been waiting for a conversation like this one for a long time, and had decided exactly who she was going to be when it arrived. "Lieutenant Caldwell," Marsh said. "Do you want to speak to this?" "I have a written statement prepared, sir," she said. Marsh blinked. "When did you prepare it?" "During the post-event medical check," she said. "I had 10 minutes. Paulson from the side of the tent made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a cough, and was somewhere exactly between the two. Maya slid a single page across the table. It was clean, precise, 3 paragraphs, a summary of the Mount Airy mission from her perspective, a reference to the autopsy findings that had not appeared in the original report, a request for a formal correction of the record pending review. Marsh read it, he read it again, he set it down. He looked at the room, at Reader's 12 pages, at Holloway sitting upright against medical advice, at Torres and the others along the wall, at Barker sitting with his phone on the table, at Maya Caldwell with her hands folded and her eyes steady. He made a decision. "The addendum goes into the record," he said. "The review request goes to division. I'll sign both referrals today." He looked at Holloway. "Sergeant Major, your review request will carry my co-signature." Holloway nodded. Marsh looked at Maya. "Lieutenant," he said, "this process is going to take time. The Army doesn't move fast on corrections." "I know, sir," she said. "I've been waiting 3 years." "I can wait longer." Marsh picked up his pen. "You shouldn't have to," he said. And he signed. After the debriefing, the tent emptied slowly, people drifting toward vehicles and billets, and the specific quiet exhaustion of a day that had asked more of them than they had planned to give. Torres was the last one left inside apart from Maya. He was standing at the table looking at the page she had written during the medical check. Marsh had left it there after signing the referral. And Torres was looking at it with the expression of someone reading something they couldn't fully absorb yet. "You wrote this in 10 minutes, he said. "I've been writing it in my head for 3 years, she said. He looked up. "Ma'am," he said. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Go ahead." "When did you stop being angry?" he said. "About the report. About what it cost you." She considered the question seriously. "I haven't," she said. He looked surprised. "I'm still angry," she said. "I'll probably always be angry. Anger isn't the problem. The problem is when anger is the only thing moving you forward. When it becomes the engine instead of the fuel." She paused. "Ryan Mercer moving me forward is the engine. The anger is just something that rides along." Torres was quiet for a moment. "The people who will read that report," he said. "The review board. They're going to see what happened today in Captain Reeder's documentation." "Yes," she said. "And Holloway's request." "Yes, and Colonel Barker is going to support the correction." "That's what his son told me," she said. "I'll believe it when I see it in writing." Torres almost smiled. "You don't trust easily," he said. "I trust what I can verify," she said. "I verify everything." He looked at the page on the table. "When this is resolved," he said. "When they correct the record, what happens to you?" She picked up the page. She folded it once. "I go back to work," she said. That's it," she said. "I never wanted a parade. I never wanted someone to carry my pack." She put the page in her pocket over her chest, next to the 3 names. "I just wanted the record to say what actually happened." Torres looked at her. Not because he knew. Because she had made it true. She walked out of the tent. Outside, the sun was dropping at an angle that turned everything it touched gold: the equipment tables, the finish line tape still strung between its poles, the trail leading back through the desert, where 28 miles had happened, and a story that had been buried for 3 years had finally found enough light to surface. Holloway was outside. He was talking on his phone. He saw her and held up one finger 1 minute and kept talking. She waited. He ended the call. "Division personnel," he said. "The review request is logged. They want preliminary documentation within 48 hours. Reader's addendum covers most of it," she said. "I'll co-author the submission," he said. "You'll have my statement by 800 tomorrow." She looked at him. "You're going to do this fast," she said. "I'm going to do it right," he said. "Fast and right if I can manage both," she nodded. He looked at her with the expression he'd been carrying since the finish line. Not guilt. Exactly. Because guilt was too small for what this was, but something adjacent to it. Something that had no clean name. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You're going to regardless," she said. Despite everything, he almost smiled. "At mile 13, he said. "When I walked with you on the trail, when you told me what happened on Mount Airy." He paused. "You didn't have to tell me." "No," she said. "You could have kept it." "Kept walking, not said a word." "Yes," she said. "Why did you tell me?" She looked at the finish line, at the tape, at the dust on the trail beyond it. "Because you asked," she said simply. He was quiet. "Most people don't," she said. "They read the report and decide, and they never ask. You walked beside me and you asked." She looked at him. That mattered. Even coming from someone who had already decided he knew the answer. He held that. "I almost didn't ask," he said. "I know," she said. "But you did." The sun was gold on everything. The trail was empty now. The names were in her pocket. And the process that 3 years had refused to start had started, finally today, because of 28 miles and 2 rucksacks and the specific, durable refusal of one soldier to put down what she was carrying until it reached where it was supposed to go. The debriefing was over, the documentation was filed, the request was logged. But something else had started, something that moved differently than paperwork, that traveled through the formation the way true things traveled, that would arrive in places neither Maya nor Holloway could fully anticipate. And it had started because at 430 in cold floodlight, a sergeant major had said 4 words. And the woman he'd said them to had answered not with words, but with everything that came after. The review request hit division personnel at 743 the following morning. Reader had filed his 12-page addendum electronically at 2,200 the night before, cross-referenced, time-stamped, and formatted with the kind of precision that personnel offices noticed because they almost never received documentation that clean from a field event. Holloway's co-signature arrived at 611. Barker's supplementary statement, the one referencing his father's informal admission about command pressure and incomplete evidence, arrived at 738, 5 minutes before the package landed on the desk of Colonel Judith Navarro, Chief of Personnel Review at the division level. Navarro read the cover memo first, then she read the addendum. Then she called her aide and said, "Pull the Mount Airy extraction report from 3 years ago. The Mercer case. I want the full investigation file on my desk within the hour." The aide said yes ma'am and left without asking why. Navarro already knew why. In 31 years of Army service, she had read hundreds of investigation reports. She knew what a clean report looked like, and she knew what a pressured one looked like, and the difference was not always dramatic, it was often in small things. Language that was slightly too definitive for the evidence supporting it. Findings that arrived at conclusions slightly faster than the documented facts could carry them. The particular careful vagueness of a board that had been told what answer was needed and had worked backward from it. She had read the Mount Airy report once before, 18 months ago, when Maya Caldwell's name had come up on a promotion list and then quietly disappeared from it. She had noted the report then. She had told herself the findings were conclusive enough. She had moved on. She was not going to move on this time. Maya didn't know any of this yet. She was at 743, sitting in the barracks with a cup of coffee that was too hot to drink and her phone in her hand, and the green notebook open on the table in front of her. Not reading it, she didn't need to read it. She had written every name in it herself, and she knew them all. She was just looking at it the way you looked at something that represented years of carrying in a form small enough to hold in one hand. Her body had delivered its accounting overnight the way she knew it would. Both shoulders had seized during the night, the specific locked tightness of muscle that had been under continuous load for too long, and had decided that morning was a reasonable time to file a complaint. Her lower back had stated its position clearly and repeatedly every time she shifted position. Her feet had expressed views she had no intention of engaging with until after she had finished the coffee. She was, as she had told Fuentes, functional. She looked at the notebook. She thought about writing another name, not because anyone else had died. Not because the notebook required a new entry, but because there was a name that had been in her head since the finish line, a name that didn't belong to a soldier lost in the field but to something else. Something that had been lost more quietly and over more years and without anyone filing a report about it. She thought about writing Lieutenant Maya Caldwell. 3 years of record that said the wrong thing. She closed the notebook. Not yet, the record wasn't corrected yet. She would write it when it was. Torres knocked on the barracks door at 800. She said, "Come in," and he came in looking like a man who had slept adequately, but woken up thinking about something that had not let him go back to sleep. He was carrying 2 cups of coffee. He set one in front of her. She looked at it. "You brought me coffee," she said. "You had one already," he said. "It looked like it was still too hot. I figured a second one in 30 minutes would be at the right temperature." She looked at him. "Torres," she said. "Ma'am, that is the most tactically sound coffee delivery I have ever witnessed." He sat down. He drank his own coffee. "How's the ankle?" she said. "Stiff," he said. "Manageable." "Ice it, tid, ma'am." He paused. "How's everything else?" She understood that he was not asking about her body. Filed. "Navarro has the package." He looked up. "Colonel Navarro in division personnel?" "You know her? My recruiter mentioned her name once," he said. "Said she ran a clean office, no politics. Then we're in the right hands," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Did you sleep?" he said. "Some. Were you thinking about the review?" "I was thinking about Ryan Mercer," she said. Torres wrapped both hands around his cup. "Tell me about him," he said. "Not the report, the actual person." She looked at him. Most people didn't ask that. Most people asked about the extraction. About the mountain. About the 40 minutes and the route choice and the cardiac arrest and the board. They asked about the event. Nobody asked about the man. She was quiet for a moment, deciding something. He was 31, she said. He had a daughter named Cora. She would have been 7 by now. She paused. He kept a photo of her in the left breast pocket of his uniform. Every deployment. He said it was the first thing he wanted to see if something went wrong. Torres said nothing. He was the kind of soldier who remembered everyone's name on the first day, she said. Not because he was performing, because he actually cared. He had a gift for it, for making people feel like they were known, like their presence mattered. She stopped. The kind of gift that's very quiet, that doesn't show up in performance evaluations, but that changes the temperature of every room it walks into. He sounds like someone worth carrying, Torres said. She looked at him. He was, she said. He is. They drank their coffee. Outside, the day was already warming. The desert didn't give ground in the morning the way other climates did. It came back fast, heat reclaiming whatever the night had briefly cooled. And by mid-morning, everything would be back to where it had been the day before. Except not everything. At 917, Navarro called Holloway directly. She did not call through an aide. She did not send an email. She called on his personal line, which she had because they had served in the same theater 14 years earlier and maintained the kind of professional relationship that survived geography and promotions, because it was built on mutual respect rather than shared convenience. Holloway answered on the second ring. Judith, he said. Derek, she said. I've read everything. He waited. The reader addendum is thorough, she said. The autopsy reference is the critical piece. The cardiac pre-existing condition is documented in the post-surgical report. It's a separate document from the investigation findings. Someone made a choice not to include it. Someone or the board, Holloway said. The board's senior reviewing officer, Navarro said. Colonel Richard Barker. A pause. You know about Barker, Holloway said. I pulled everything, she said, and I've spoken to the judge advocate's office this morning. A beat. His son filed a supplementary statement that references an informal admission by the colonel regarding command pressure and deliberate omission of exculpatory evidence. The son is Lieutenant James Barker, Holloway said. He was on the Iron Valley course yesterday, I know, she said. His statement is part of the package. A pause. Derek. This isn't just a correction of the record. I know what it is, he said. This is potential misconduct against a serving colonel. I know what it is, he said again. His voice was steady. And I know what I'm asking for. Navarro was quiet. If this goes the way the evidence points, she said, Caldwell's record gets corrected. The finding gets reversed. She gets 3 years of career restoration consideration. That's what she deserves, he said. It also means Colonel Barker faces a formal inquiry. That's what he deserves, Holloway said. Another pause. You stood up for her, Navarro said, not a question. I owed her that much, he said. And more. I'll fast-track the preliminary review, she said. 96 hours. I want a full panel convened by end of week. Holloway closed his eyes briefly. 96 hours. 3 years and then 96 hours. Tell Caldwell, Navarro said. She should know the timeline. I'll tell her, he said. And Derek, Navarro paused. What you did today, filing that request. Co-signing reader's addendum. That took something. It took less than it should have, he said. It should have happened 3 years ago. He hung up. He sat for a moment in the quiet of his quarters. Then he stood up. He had a lieutenant to find. He found her in the motor pool. Not for any operational reason, she was simply walking. Which he had come to understand was what Maya Caldwell did when she was thinking hard about something that required motion to process. She had Torres with her, though Torres appeared to be doing more listening than talking, which was a skill the young private had clearly been developing since Mile 3 yesterday. Holloway fell in beside her without ceremony. She looked at him. Navarro called, she said. It wasn't 96 hours, he said. Full panel by end of week. She absorbed this. Her stride didn't change. Her breathing didn't change. But something in her face did, something very small and very controlled. The way a thing that has been held tightly for a long time changed when someone told it the holding was almost over. End of week, she said. She's fast-tracking it, he said. The autopsy document is the lever. The omission is documentable. Barker's statement from his son, that's what opens the misconduct angle. She nodded. Torres, beside her, was very carefully not reacting, which was the correct instinct and which she noted. What does fast-tracking mean for Colonel Barker, she said. A formal inquiry, Holloway said. Whether it goes beyond that depends on what the panel finds. I'm not interested in his punishment, she said. Holloway looked at her. I'm interested in my record, she said. What happens to him is the Army's problem. What happens to my record is mine. Understood, he said. I need to hear that the finding gets reversed, she said. Not softened, not qualified. Reversed. The record has to say what actually happened on that mountain. That's what the review is designed to determine, he said. I know what it's designed to determine, she said. I'm telling you what I need to walk out of it. He looked at her. I know, he said, and I'm telling you I'll be there when the panel convenes. My statement will be on the record. Reader's addendum will be on the record. And if they need a witness account of your conduct under pressure, I'll give them 28 miles worth. She looked at him. Yesterday nearly killed you, she said. Yesterday changed me, he said. That's different. They walked, Tora said very quietly, ma'am. End of week. That's 4 days, I know, she said. What do you do for 4 days? She thought about it. The same thing I've done for 3 years, she said. Work and wait. The 4 days were not quiet. Word had moved through the division the way Paulson had predicted it would at the finish line, not through official channels, not through any organized effort, but through the organic network of soldiers who talked to soldiers who talked to officers who talked to NCOs, the informal information system that every military unit ran in parallel with its official one, and that was frequently more accurate. What moved was not the story of the review. What moved was the story of the Ruck, the 28 miles, the double pack, the woman who went back 3 miles in a desert heat to retrieve a name that was about to be removed from the record. What the checkpoint count of adjusting Okonkwo's tape job at mile 3. The medical team's account of her stabilizing Holloway in 8 seconds flat with 45 pounds on her back. The water station soldier who had watched her overhear Barker's conversation and walk away without saying a word, and then keep walking for 15 more miles. What moved was Torres telling his 3 sisters on a phone call that he had met someone who changed what he thought a leader was. What moved was Dempsey calling his 17-year-old son and saying, I want you to meet someone before you make that decision. Someone who'll show you what service actually looks like. What moved was Paulson, in the NCO club 2 days after the event, telling the story of the flats, the miles of nothing, the soldiers on the edge of quitting. The woman who talked them through it one conversation at a time, without anyone knowing it was happening until it was done. What moved was Fuentes correcting his cross-tape technique in the field manual he kept in his kit and writing, in the margin next to the corrected angle, per Lt. Caldwell, Iron Valley. None of this was official, all of it was real. Colonel Richard Barker called Maya directly on day 2. Not through his son, not through Holloway. He called her personal line at 1,400 hours. And she was in the middle of a hydration assessment with her platoon when it rang, and she looked at the number, and then at her soldiers and said, Give me 5 minutes, and stepped away. She answered Lieutenant Caldwell, a voice said. Not James Barker's voice, older, heavier, the voice of a man who had been carrying something heavy enough to change the way he breathed. Colonel Barker, she said, a pause. My son told me about the Ruck, he said. I know, she said, he told me about the 28 miles. The second pack. He told me what Paulson told you. About the combat controller Garza, she said nothing. I've been in this army for 33 years, he said. I've signed a lot of documents. Another pause. That report is the only one I've regretted. She stood in the dust outside the training area and held the phone and listened. I want to appear before the panel, he said voluntarily. I want to give a corrective statement on the record. She was quiet for a moment. You understand what that means for you, she said. Yes, he said, it opens the misconduct inquiry. I know, he said. You could let the evidence speak without adding to it, she said. The autopsy report alone may be enough to reverse the finding. It may be, he said, but it doesn't explain why the autopsy report was excluded in the first place. And that explanation has to come from me. She stood in the heat and thought about 3 years. About every promotion board that had seen her file and seen the finding and moved on. About the 11 pages. About Ryan Mercer's name on a rucksack she had carried for 28 miles. Why, she said, why not 3 years ago? He was quiet for a long time, because 3 years ago he said slowly, you were a name in a file. A file I had been told the complete story, a pause. Today you're a soldier who went back 3 miles in a desert for a name I helped bury. And I don't have the right to stay quiet about that anymore. She breathed in through the nose, out through the mouth. The way she had been doing since 432 days ago. Appear before the panel, Colonel, she said. Yes, ma'am, he said. And then he hung up. She stood there for a moment with the phone in her hand and the sun on her face. Yes, ma'am, a colonel, 33 years of service. To a lieutenant with a 3-year-old finding that was about to stop being true. She put her phone in her pocket. She walked back to her soldiers. She finished the hydration assessment. She didn't say a word about the call. The panel convened on day 4. Navarro ran it herself, which was unusual. Division chiefs typically delegated panel proceedings to a subordinate reviewing officer. But she had read Reader's addendum twice and then read it again and had decided that unusual circumstances created unusual obligations. The room held 7 people, Navarro, 2 reviewing officers, a JAG representative, a personnel recorder, Holloway, and Maya. Colonel Richard Barker was present via secure video feed, having driven to the nearest secure facility that morning, a 4-hour drive he had made alone. The proceedings took 3 hours and 42 minutes. Maya spoke for 22 minutes. She spoke without notes. She described the terrain, the route decision, the active fire position at the junction, the solo carry, the 4 miles. She described arriving at the collection point. She described sitting outside the surgical tent for 6 hours. She described the notification. She described the report. She did not editorialize. She presented facts. The panel listened with the quality of attention that trained reviewers brought to testimony they recognized as credible, not moving, not interrupting, recording. When she finished, Navarro said, "Thank you, Lieutenant." Then Colonel Barker spoke. He spoke for 11 minutes. He confirmed the command pressure. He confirmed the decision to exclude the autopsy document. He confirmed that the finding had been shaped by a need for a causal factor rather than driven by the available evidence. He used the word wrong 4 times in 11 minutes, which was 4 more times than most colonels used it in official proceedings in 33 years of service. When he finished, the room was quiet. Navarro looked at the 2 reviewing officers. They conferred briefly. Navarro looked at Maya. "Lieutenant Caldwell," she said. "The panel will need time to deliberate." Maya nodded. However, Navarro said, "I want to say something for the record before we recess." She picked up her pen, set it down, looked at Maya directly. "In 31 years I have reviewed several hundred investigation reports. I can recognize on reading when a finding has been built backward from a conclusion." She paused. "That report should not have reached a finding. It should have been returned for supplemental investigation. That didn't happen, and you carried the cost of that failure." The JAG representative was writing. The recorder was recording. Holloway was looking at the table. Maya was looking at Navarro. "The panel will recess," Navarro said. They recessed. Maya sat outside the room on a wooden bench in a hallway that smelled like every army hallway she had ever been in, cleaning product and institutional carpet, and the particular dry stillness of a building that processed paperwork for a living. Holloway sat beside her. Neither of them spoke for a while. Then Holloway said, "Navarro said it on the record." "I heard," Maya said. "That's not neutral panel conduct," he said. "No," she said, "it's not. That means she already knows what the finding is going to be." "Probably," she said. He was quiet. "How are you feeling?" he said. She thought about the question. "I've been angry for 3 years," she said. "I've been carrying something heavy for 3 years. And right now, sitting in this hallway, I can't actually feel either of those things very clearly." "What can you feel?" "Tired," she said. "Very tired," he nodded. "That's what it feels like," he said. "When something is almost over, that was never supposed to take this long." She looked at him. "I'm sorry," he said. "Not procedurally. Not as part of a statement for the record, just directly. The apology of one person to another. For what I said at 430. And for everything that my version of you prevented." She held the apology. She didn't wave it away. She didn't say it was fine. "I know you are," she said. "I can tell the difference between an apology that costs something and one that doesn't." She paused. "Yours costs something." He said nothing. "That matters to me," she said. They sat in the hallway. Torres was somewhere outside, waiting with Paulson and Okonkwo and Dempsey and Bivens, a small group of soldiers who had no official reason to be at a division building on a Thursday afternoon and who were there anyway, in the parking lot, because they had decided without discussion that this was where they were supposed to be. At the 40-minute mark, the door opened. Navarro stood in the doorway. She looked at Maya. "The panel has reached a finding," she said. Maya stood. Holloway stood beside. They walked in. The room was settled, the 7 people in their chairs. The screen with Colonel Barker's face, still present, still watching. Navarro sat at the head of the table. She opened the folder in front of her. "In the matter of the Mount Airy extraction, dated 3 years prior, regarding Staff Sergeant Ryan Mercer," she said. "The Division Personnel Review Panel finds as follows." She read, "The original investigative finding designating Lieutenant Maya Caldwell as a responsible party for failure to execute extraction protocol is reversed in its entirety." Maya heard the sentence. She breathed. "Evidence reviewed by the panel, including post-surgical autopsy documentation, testimony from the subject officer, and corrective statement from the original panel's senior reviewing officer, establishes that the medic of record executed the extraction under conditions that precluded use of the primary route without high probability of additional casualties." She breathed again. "The extended route was a sound tactical decision made under active fire in real time. The medical outcome, cardiac arrest resulting from pre-existing condition exacerbated by blood loss and physical exertion, was not caused by the extended route or any decision made by Lieutenant Caldwell during the extraction. Her hands were folded on the table. She kept them folded. The original finding is replaced with the following. Lieutenant Maya Caldwell executed the Mount Airy extraction in a manner consistent with her training, her judgment, and her duty. She carried Staff Sergeant Ryan Mercer for 4 miles under fire across mountain terrain in conditions that prevented helicopter extraction. She delivered him to the casualty collection point alive. The outcome of his surgical care was not within her control and was not a product of her decisions. Navarro looked up. "The record will be corrected immediately," she said. "Your personnel file will reflect the corrected finding within 72 hours. All boards that reviewed your file during the period of the erroneous finding will be notified." She paused. "And the division will be submitting a formal commendation for the Mount Airy extraction, effective retroactively from the original date." Maya said a commendation. "You carried a soldier 4 miles under fire," Navarro said. "That should have been in your record 3 years ago." Maya looked at the table, and regarding the Iron Valley Challenge, Navarro continued. "Captain Reader's addendum has been entered into your service record as a performance documentation. Sergeant Major Holloway's co-signature has been noted." She paused. "The division is also reviewing the Iron Valley completion standards to formalize a procedure for carrying a fallen soldier's name when the designated carrier cannot complete the course." She closed the folder. "What you did on that course," Navarro said, "will be the standard." The room was quiet. Colonel Barker's face on the screen was very still. Holloway had his eyes on Maya. Maya looked at Navarro. "Ma'am," she said. Her voice was steady. She had known it would be steady. She had been certain of this for 3 years, that when this moment came, if it came, she would not break in front of a panel. Not because breaking was wrong, but because she had learned, over 3 years of carrying, how to be the same person in hard moments that she was in easy ones. "One request." "Go ahead," Navarro said. "The correction to my file," she said. "I want 1 line added. Just 1 line." "What line?" Navarro said. "That Ryan Mercer made it to the collection point," she said. "That he was alive when I handed him over. That he was not abandoned on that mountain." Navarro looked at her for a long moment. "That line belongs in the record," Navarro said. "Consider it done." She walked out of the building into the afternoon. The sun was the same sun it had been 2 days ago on the course. Torres saw her face as she came through the door and read it immediately. He had been learning to read her since mile 3, and by now he was fluent. He said, "It's done, not a question, it's done," she said. Paulson let out a long breath. Okonkwo said nothing. He put one hand briefly on her shoulder and then took it away, because Okonkwo understood that some moments didn't need to be filled. Dempsey said, "What happens now?" She looked at the group. At Torres with his taped ankle and his youngest sister starting nursing school in September. At Okonkwo, who had walked in from Lagos through a recruiter's office into a formation he had made his own. At Paulson, who had 19 years and a daughter at the piano. At Dempsey, whose son had looked at his father's life and decided it was worth something. At Bivens, who had stopped complaining at mile 16 and never started again. "Now we go back to work," she said. Dempsey almost smiled. "That's it? That's everything," she said. She reached into her pocket. She took out the green notebook. She uncapped the pen clipped to the spine. She opened to the page after the last name. She wrote 2 lines. The first, Staff Sergeant Ryan Mercer. He made it to the collection point. He was not abandoned. The second, Lieutenant Maya Caldwell. The record now says what actually happened. She capped the pen. She closed the notebook. She put it back in her chest pocket over her heart, where it had been for 28 miles and 3 years, and every step of a story that had never been told correctly until today. Torres was watching her. "Is that the end?" he said. She looked at him. She thought about the 4 miles on a mountain in the dark. She thought about the collection point, and the surgical tent, and the 6 hours waiting. She thought about 430 and cold floodlights and 4 words that had tried to define her. She thought about 28 miles and 97 pounds, and a name that had to cross a finish line. She thought about Cora Mercer, who would be 7 now, and whose father had not been abandoned, and whose father's record would finally say so. "No," she said, "that's the beginning." She put the notebook in her pocket. She walked, not because she had somewhere she needed to be, because walking was what she did. Because some people quit when the weight got heavy, and some people found out what they were made of only when they were carrying more than anyone thought they could. And Maya Caldwell had known for a long time which kind she was, had known it on a mountain, had known it in 3 years of silence, had known it at 430 under cold floodlights, when a man told the world she needed help, and she tightened her straps and waited for the trail to begin. She was the kind who carried. She had always been. And the record finally, completely, without qualification, now said so too.